Well, the thing about the 97 flood is it affected the entire area. So a lot of times, floods will have one little section of the basin flood, like maybe the Kentucky or maybe the Green, but the 97, every basin we had flooded. And some of the worst flooding was right here in Louisville. The amount of rainfall we got on that day was over 10 inches, which I think is still a 24-hour record for the state of Kentucky, right here in this office. So I knew it was going to be a bad day, okay? So I was working that Saturday, and that's when the really heavy rain started. I was driving to work, and when I got off I-65 to get on the Snyder, that ramp was almost closed. I had to bring my car way over to the emergency side just to get through, just to get to work. And that wasn't the worst of the rain. So yeah, I knew it was going to be a really bad day. I think I worked 12 hours that day. And then what happened was the other person who was working the hydrology department with me, his name is Mike Murphy, we decided we were going to do 12-hour shifts, 12 on, 12 off. So the thing about that storm is it rained so hard that a lot of our observers had their homes flooded, so they couldn't report. The critical reading was near this little town called Falmouth on the Licking River. The radar estimated they had a foot of rain in 24 hours. My observer upstream of there was in Blue Lick Springs. He was really a great observer, and he actually took a risk. That was one of those places where you had to actually walk out to the bridge and lower wire weight to get the reading. A little wire comes down and has a weight attached to it, and that's how high you... Well, the water was almost to the bridge surface. So he actually walked out to that bridge as water was hitting the bridge and got me a reading. But he called in that morning and he said, "I'm sorry," he said, "I've lost my rain gauge. I don't know where it is. It floated off." So it just shows you how high the river was. And he called me up about another couple of days later and he said, "Oh, I found the rain gauge. It was in a tree downstream a couple miles." So we really didn't get an official reading, so we were using radar estimates. But a foot of rain was probably pretty close. And so we had the flood, it flooded all the little places that flood fast. But then all that water drained into the Ohio River, and the Ohio River just kept rising and rising and rising. And they actually had to install the closures on both sides of the river. In Jeffersonville, it's been a long time since they've done that. So for a while there, both sides of the river, the flood walls were complete. And caused all kinds of problems, and areas outside the flood wall, of course, got flooded pretty badly. This was, of course, way before we had all the automation we had there. So you actually had to type all the statements manually. So that's what I did for 12 hours, is I basically typed and answered the phone. I would get the new reports that coming in from the River Forecast Center, and I would look at them and make sure that they weren't already bad, because the rivers were rising so fast. It was hard to keep up with it. But the funny story about down Shepherdsville, they hardly ever flood, and they were told that Taylorsville Lake would prevent Shepherdsville from ever flooding again when they built it. And that's not exactly right. Taylorsville Lake helps a little bit, but it doesn't control the entire basin. So when I gave Shepherdsville their forecast, I got a call from the emergency manager. He says, "I know this is going to sound nuts," he said, "but can you fax me a copy of that so I can show it to them on a piece of paper so they'll believe it?" Because again, they'd never seen the river go that high and were told it never would go that high again. The town that got hit the hardest was probably Falmouth, Kentucky. And that was, but a lot of places were hit hard. Paris, I was in real good contact with the the people who run the water plant at Paris. They also run the power plant there too. They're right next to each other. And I told him how high the river was going to go, and he just couldn't believe it. But he believed me and had shut everything down. But another little place there, Cynthiana, they got hit really, really hard, and that was a thing where the water actually went over the bridge. Just things that hadn't happened before or in a long, long time, really not since the 37 flood. Well, I think what it was is people now believe the Weather Service. There was a lot of people when we were putting out these remarkable forecasts at first didn't believe us. They just didn't think the rivers could go that high. And after they experienced it, they believed us from that point on. We didn't have any troubles with emergency managers believing our forecasts. So that was one of the things. Seeing is believing. And yeah, it had been a long, long time since the rivers had done anything like that. Like, I guess you'd have to go back to like 1964. And in some areas, this flood even surpassed the 64 flood. So yeah, that was the one thing, is they started believing us.